The night before my wedding, someone slipped a VIP resort key card under my door. The room number was the same suite where Xavier had proposed to me 3 years ago. I thought it was a romantic surprise he had arranged. But when I pushed open the door, I saw him naked, tangled with another woman on the bed. Xavier finally pulled out of her. Taking his time, he lit a cigarette and smiled through the smoke. I didn't want to keep hiding this from you anyway. I wanted you to find out tonight, so I wouldn't have to explain after the wedding. He flicked the ash. Don't worry, you're still my only wife. You've been with me for 10 years. Who else would take a worn-out wife like you? Now, tomorrow, everything goes as planned. The wedding is yours, but the marriage certificate goes to her. He thought I would at least scream, cry, beg. I just quietly slid the engagement ring off my finger, dropped it on the nightstand next to her panties, and walked out. The next morning, Xavier waited for me at the church in his groom's suit. I didn't run. I walked right up to him on the arm of his sworn business rival. The marriage certificate already in my hand. The wedding ceremony is yours. The marriage certificate. I gave it to him. She's coming. The bride is finally coming out. A swarm of reporters had gathered outside the church. Miss Olivia, how do you feel on your wedding day? Miss Olivia, what do you think about the wedding of the century? Mr. Xavier prepared for you? I didn't answer. I slipped into the car under the bodyguard's escort. Xavier stood on the steps in his white groom suit, wearing the smile of a man who had everything between his legs. And everything in his name. That morning, he had called to tell me he had fucked Windsor 7 times. Last night, his body was wrecked. He couldn't come pick up his bride. He was certain I would still come anyway. His friend Matthew was the first to whistle. She still came. Matthew nudged Xavier with his elbow, his face full of crude amusement. Xavier's got the magic touch. 7 rounds the night before the wedding. And the bride still shows up in her gown. That's what I call having a woman trained. Another friend chimed in. The way he went at it last night, anyone else would be in a wheelchair. But Xavier can still stand here as the groom. Several of them laughed.
Xavier's lips curva.
His tone was casual. Olivia's been with me for 10 years. Used goods. Besides marrying me, who else would want her? He glanced down at the engagement ring I had returned the night before. Throwing a little tantrum is normal, but in the end, she will still walk up to me, kneel, and put her hand in mine. Matthew gave him a thumbs up. The car door opened. I stepped out in my white dress. A flash of genuine amazement crossed Xavier's eyes. His voice softened for a moment. Olivia looked so beautiful in a wedding dress. But before he could touch my hand, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the name on the screen. His lips unconsciously curved. He stepped aside to take the call. What's wrong, sweetheart? Didn't I tell you to call me later? A lazy, coquettish voice purred through Xavier. I'm flying abroad this afternoon. I booked us a marriage registration in 10 minutes. Come to City Hall. I want the certificate before I leave. 10 minutes, Xavier chuckled. So eager to be my wife. After hanging up, Matthew walked over.
Who was that?
Windsor. Xavier slipped the phone into his pocket, his eyes lighting up. She won't leave the country without my last name. She's being so sweet. I can't say no. What about the wedding here? What's the rush? The ceremony takes an hour or 2. I'll go to City Hall first. It's a 10-minute signature. You know Windsor's personality. If I don't humor her, she'll actually cry in front of an entire airport terminal. Matthew wisely said nothing. Xavier walked over, slipped his arm around my shoulder, and motioned to the photographer. Come on, take a quick shot for the memories.
Click done.
He glanced at his watch. All right, I've got to go, or I'll miss the slot. He turned and strode toward another car. Xavier, I stood my ground and called after him. He paused and looked back. His expression still carried that careless confidence of someone who held all the cards. If you leave today, I said, word by word, I will replace the groom at this wedding. He froze for half a second, then laughed in my face. Replace the groom? Where would you find one? You think life is a fucking TV drama? Everyone in Seattle knows you're mine. Used, stamped, stained with my name. Of course, if you actually have the ability to find someone who dares marry a woman who's been under me for 10 years, I wouldn't mind letting you try. He opened the car door and tossed back a casual quip. Stop making a scene. Be good, and wait for me. The other women are just toys. You're the wife. The groomsmen exchanged glances. Matthew chased after him. Xavier, are you actually leaving? You all hold down the fort. It's not like I'm not coming back. Windsor's too clingy. Won't let me out of bed unless I sign the paper first. The car pulled away. I stood where I was, the hem of my dress lifting in the wind. The photographer beside me held his camera, standing awkwardly. No one spoke. I looked down at my empty ring finger and slowly curved my lips into a smile. Xavier, go ahead. Go register your child bride. This multi-million-dollar wedding of the century. I will gladly accept it. I lifted my dress and walked into the church. Guests were seated. The officiant was in position. The wedding march was playing. The white rose waterfall by the floor to ceiling windows. The crystal bead curtains hanging from the dome. Even the font on the guest place cards had been specially designed by a typographer Xavier had hired from Italy. Everything was perfect except the groom wasn't there. Matthew caught up to me with a forced smile. Olivia, Xavier has an urgent matter. He'll be back soon. Another groomsman, Edward, came over. Xavier always knows what he's doing. It's your big day. He'll definitely be back soon. Several of them chimed in, trying to make the groom running off mid-wedding to fuck another woman sound like he had just gone to pick up a package. Okay, I will wait for him. I sent them off calmly. I would wait. But who I was waiting for was none of their business. In the dressing room, my best friend, Barbara, who had flown from Australia to be my bridesmaid, was shaking with rage. Is Xavier sick in the head, running off to get a marriage certificate with another woman?
On his wedding day?
Did his brain get caught in a fucking door? When you two were planning this wedding together, he searched every flower shop in the city just to pick the perfect bouquet for you. When you tried on wedding dresses, his eyes got red faster than yours.
I was so jealous of you.
I got sour and beat up my clueless boyfriend. Who could have imagined he would turn around and stick it in? Some fresh out of college princess? Barbara paused, her voice dropping. Olivia, stop waiting. You should live for yourself. For once, I didn't respond. I just looked down at my phone. On Instagram, Windsor had just posted a new update. The photo showed Xavier's shirt and Windsor's lingerie scattered on the floor of the hotel suite. A used condom wrapper visible in the corner of the frame. Caption: someone said he would only come for 10 minutes.
But he came a lot more than that.
She had deliberately tagged the location. It wasn't City Hall. Windsor replied to a comment below. Whoever is standing around in a wedding dress, with no groom to wait for,
can get mad.
Maybe she should learn to keep a man satisfied next time. I expressionlessly took a screenshot. Windsor was the only daughter of an investor fresh out of college. 22 years old, tight body, daddy issues, everything Xavier liked. Ever since they had met at a celebration banquet, his eyes hadn't been right. He had spent the rest of that night with his hand high on her thigh, under the table. After 10 years together, if I didn't understand him, I wouldn't have lasted this long. So I chose to believe him through many ambiguous moments, through many late nights with no replies, through the lipstick stains he claimed came from a client hug. But Barbara was right. He had faked it so well, faking it until the day before the wedding, to finally tear off that last layer of disguise, using the cruelest method to make me see with my own eyes, hear with my own ears what he really thought of me. I walked toward the balcony at the end of the hallway for some air. Just as I was about to push the door open, I heard several men's voices inside. The groomsmen were hiding their smoking. Wait, Xavier's really not coming back,
he said.
Windsor's riding him so hard he can't get up. He told us to stall. Matthew exhaled smoke. How long do you think Olivia's temper can hold out? Look at her today, wedding dress on red carpet. Walked. Groom ran off to fuck someone else, and she didn't even furrow her brow. A wife like that. What more could a man want? Edward sighed. Xavier really doesn't know how good he has it. That little fox. Windsor knows things in bed Olivia probably never learned. Several of them laughed, and someone made a video call. Xavier, you finally picked up. Olivia's still waiting.
Wet.
Unmistakable sounds came from the other end of the phone. A woman's high-pitched moan. Can't you see? I'm fucking busy. Xavier's voice carried the rough edge of arousal. I can't come back. Just take care of the relatives and friends. Okay, Xavier. You do your thing. Matthew said with a sleazy grin. Olivia is way easier to deal with anyway. Before he finished speaking, I pushed open the balcony door. The smiles froze on their faces. Matthew hid the phone behind him. Olivia, I looked at them. The wedding starts in 3 minutes. There are over 300 guests sitting out there. Are you going to make them wait, or let them watch the spares? Olivia, stop making a scene. Edward laughed. 3 minutes is enough. Xavier's not that fast. He can't finish. He's been at her for hours. It is enough. I calmly cut him off, then turned and left. Only then did Matthew remember the video was still on. Xavier, Olivia says the wedding starts in 3 minutes. You better hurry. Xavier's low laugh came through the phone, breathless. 3 minutes? Does this woman have some kind of misunderstanding about me? I don't rush. A woman's slick giggle came through the receiver, followed by a wet, deliberate sound.
Xavier.
So the other end was silent for 2 seconds. Go ahead and help me hold down the scene. I'll come over when I'm done. I'm halfway through a round, and I don't leave a woman hanging. As he spoke, Windsor's coquettish moan came through in the background. Matthew quickly hung up the video call. The groomsmen straightened their suits and walked out of the balcony. Edward caught up to me quietly. Olivia, after all these years, we all know about you and Xavier. He does care about you in his heart. Men, the body and the heart are different things. I didn't look at him or respond. The church door slowly opened. Someone stood in the backlight. Then every smile froze. A man in a black tuxedo stepped through the door. Tall, sharp jaw, eyes cold as a knife edge. Lucas Wright, the groom's biggest enemy in the shipping industry. The man Xavier had spent the last 5 years trying to bury, sue, and ruin. He walked straight down the aisle toward me and offered his arm. The whole hall went dead silent. Olivia, he looked at me, his voice low. And even the car is outside. The judge is waiting. I slid my hand into the crook of his elbow. Matthew stumbled back a step, his face white. Olivia, what the fuck are you doing? What is he doing here? I turned and looked at the 300 guests in the church. Xavier sends his deepest apologies. He had an urgent appointment at City Hall this morning. He has been balls deep in Miss Windsor for the last 2 hours. And will be marrying her in approximately 7 minutes. A wave of gas swept the room. I lifted my dress. Since the wedding has already been paid for, it would be a waste not to use it. I'm keeping the ceremony. I am keeping the cake. I am keeping the 300 guests. I am keeping the venue. I am just changing the groom. I walked down the aisle with Lucas' wedding march played behind me. Matthew was frantically dialing Xavier's number, his hands shaking so badly he kept missing the screen. The call went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, across town, Xavier had just rolled off Windsor and was reaching for his belt. You are really leaving? Windsor sat on the bed wrapped in sheets, her thighs still slick. You promised to stay with me all day. I only agreed to postpone the certificate because of that. And now you're leaving while I'm still soaking. I have to go. Xavier picked up his jacket. She only gave me 3 minutes. What temper? Winds are pounded. Isn't she the most understanding wife in Seattle? Understanding is one thing, but today is different. Xavier wiped a smudge of her lipstick off his neck. The wedding of the century. I promised her that. Then why did you come here? Didn't you insist? Xavier smiled, walked over, and pinched her cheek. Good spread for me again, tonight when I get back. Windsor swatted his hand away. When will the certificate be postponed to? We will see. Xavier answered vaguely, picking up his phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up. Messages were exploding, all from the friend group. Voice messages one after another. The last one was a video from Matthew. He frowned and tapped it open. His eyes widened. The video buffered for a fraction of a second, the pixelated image sharpening into a scene that made the blood in Xavier's veins turn to ice. It was his church, his flowers, his 300 handpicked guests. And there was Olivia. She wasn't crying. She wasn't curled in a corner, begging for him to return as he had so confidently predicted to Matthew. She was standing at the altar, radiant and impossibly poised, the white silk of her gown cascading around her, like liquid ivory. But it wasn't the sight of her that made Xavier's breath catch in his throat, choking him. It was the man standing beside her. Lucas Wright. Xavier stared at the screen, his mind violently rejecting the information. Lucas Wright didn't attend weddings. He didn't socialize. He was a ruthless, cold-blooded predator in the shipping industry who had spent the last half-decade systematically carving chunks out of Xavier's market share. On the screen, Lucas slowly turned to face the camera. He didn't look triumphant or smug. He looked entirely in his element. He lifted Olivia's hand, the hand that had worn Xavier's ring just 12 hours ago, and slid a massive, blindingly clear emerald-cut diamond onto her finger. The officiant's voice, trembling slightly, crackled through the phone's speakers. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas leaned in. He didn't rush. He kissed Olivia with a slow, deliberate possession that made the 300 guests erupt into a deafening mix of gasps and applause. The phone slipped from Xavier's numb fingers, clattering against the hotel room's hardwood floor. Xavier. Windsor's voice whined from the bed, the petulance grating against the sudden, roaring silence in his head. Are you listening to me? My dad said. Shut up, Xavier snarled, the words tearing out of his throat. Windsor blinked, her manufactured pout vanishing into genuine shock. Excuse me? You don't get to talk to me like. Xavier didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, his movements jerky and panicked as he snatched his belt from the floor. He jammed his legs into his trousers, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage the zipper. Replace the groom? Where would you find one? His own voice echoed mockingly in his head. I will replace the groom at this wedding. Xavier. Where are you going? Windsor shrieked, clutching the bedsheets to her
chest.
He ignored her. He grabbed his keys, didn't bother with his tie, and bolted out
The door.
He ran down the hotel corridor, his heart hammering against his ribs. Like a trapped animal. This was a joke. It had to be a stunt. Olivia was throwing a tantrum. She had hired an actor, or maybe Lucas was just there to humiliate him. Yes, that was it. A public humiliation tactic. Legally, they couldn't be married. You needed a license. You needed a judge. The judge is waiting, Lucas's voice whispered in his memory. Xavier slammed his fist into the elevator button, a low, guttural sound of pure panic escaping his lips. Back at the church, the atmosphere was electric. I turned away from the altar, my hand resting comfortably in the crook of Lucas's arm. The shock radiating from the pews was palpable. Aunts and uncles were pale. Business associates were frantically whispering, undoubtedly calculating the corporate fallout of this sudden alliance. Matthew and Edward stood near the front row, looking like men who had just watched an execution. Congratulations, Mrs. Wright, Lucas murmured. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated against my side. I glanced up at him. Up close, Lucas Wright was intimidatingly handsome. There was a harsh, geometric perfection to his jawline, and his eyes were the color of slate, cold, calculating yet, as they looked down at me, surprisingly gentle. Thank you for coming, Mr. Wright, I replied softly, keeping my smile perfectly composed for the flashing cameras of the guests. When you called me at 3 a.m. offering me 40% of Xavier's offshore logistics network in exchange for a marriage certificate, I thought I was dreaming, Lucas said, his lips barely moving as we walked down the aisle.
I
wouldn't have missed this for the world. You look stunning, by the way. I aimed to please. We stepped out into the crisp Seattle air, the heavy oak doors of the church closing behind us. The reporters, who had been waiting for a glimpse of the wedding of the century, went absolutely rabid when they saw who I was holding onto. Miss Olivia. Where is Xavier? Mr. Wright, are you two together? Is this a hostile takeover? Lucas's security detail, 4 massive men in tailored suits, instantly formed a perimeter, pushing the paparazzi back. Lucas didn't flinch. He raised a hand, commanding absolute silence from the press. Astonishingly, they quieted down. My wife, Lucas said, the word rolling off his tongue with natural authority, has had an exhausting morning. Xavier's indiscretions have officially made him a footnote in her life. Any further questions about him can be directed to his mistress. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a reception to attend. He guided me into the back of a waiting Maybach. The heavy door shut, cutting off the frenzy of the flashes. Inside the quiet luxury of the car, the adrenaline finally began to ebb. I let out a long, shaky breath and sank into the leather seats. Lucas poured 2 glasses of champagne from the car's minibar and handed me one. You held up flawlessly, but you're shaking. I took the glass, wrapping my cold fingers around the crystal stem. 10 years. I whispered, staring at the bubbles rising to the surface. 10 years of building him, fixing his mistakes, cleaning up his messes, smiling while he treated me like a safety net he could wipe his feet on. I looked at Lucas. I thought I would cry today, but I just feel empty. Lucas didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. He simply clinked his glass against mine. Emptiness is good, Olivia. It means there's room to build something new. Xavier was a parasite. Today, you cut him
out. Drink.
I took a sip. The champagne burned my throat in the best possible way. So, I said, leaning back. The reception. We have 300 guests heading to the Four Seasons ballroom. Are you ready to play the doting groom? A dark, dangerous smile curved Lucas's lips. I've been preparing for a war with Xavier for 5 years. Taking his bride, his wedding, and his dignity all in one afternoon? Darling, I was born ready. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was a masterpiece of white roses, crystal, chandeliers, and flowing champagne. The guests had arrived in a state of bewildered excitement. What was supposed to be a standard, high society wedding had morphed into the scandal of the decade. Barbara found me in the bridal suite just before the grand entrance. She slammed the door shut behind her and grabbed my shoulders. "You absolute sociopath," she yelled, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter awe. "Lucas, right? The Lucas, right? The guy who supposedly eats rival CEOs for breakfast?" "He's a vegetarian, actually," I said smoothly, touching up my lipstick in the mirror. "Olivia, how did you pull this off?" "Xavier thought I was asleep at the wheel," I said, my tone flattening.
He
"Thought because I tolerated his late nights and his client dinners that I was stupid. But you don't spend 10 years as the silent partner of a billionaire without learning where the bodies are buried. I reached out to Lucas a month ago when I found the first hotel receipt. Last night was just the final push I needed to pull the trigger." Barbara stared at me, then slowly broke into a feral grin. "I am going to get so drunk tonight. I love you." "Ladies." Lucas stood in the doorway. He had removed his tuxedo jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He looked relaxed, powerful, and entirely in control. "They're ready for us," he said, extending a hand to me. I took it. His grip was warm and firm. As we walked toward the ballroom doors, the MC's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Wright." The doors swung open. The applause was deafening. We walked out onto the marble dance floor, the spotlight tracking us. Lucas pulled me flush against his chest, one hand resting securely on the small of my back. We moved perfectly in sync, the tension of the day melting into the rhythm of the music. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open with a concussive bang. The music ground to a halt. The whispers died. Xavier stood in the doorway. He was a mess. His tailored white groom's suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and the collar of his shirt was unbuttoned. A faint smear of Windsor's red lipstick was still visible just beneath his jawline. He was panting, his eyes wild and bloodshot as they swept across the silent room. His gaze locked onto me. "Olivia," he roared, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of rage and panic. He stormed across the ballroom. The guests parted for him like the Red Sea, pulling their skirts and drinks out of his path. Matthew and Edward materialized from the crowd, trying to grab his arms. "Xavier, don't," Matthew hissed. "It's over, man. Let's just go. Get your fucking hands off me." Xavier shoved Matthew aside, stumbling slightly. Before righting himself, he stopped 10 feet from where Lucas and I stood. He looked at me, his chest heaving. "What is this? What the hell is this?" "Olivia, this is my wedding reception," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I didn't step back. I didn't hide behind Lucas. I stood my ground, staring down the man who had wasted my 20s. "You were busy," I improvised. Xavier let out a harsh, breathless laugh. "You're out of your mind. You think this is funny? You think you can just hire this bastard to stand in for me? To teach me a lesson?" He pointed a shaking finger at Lucas. "You think I don't know this is fake?" "Fake." Lucas finally spoke. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute chilling calm in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Lucas reached into the inner pocket of his waistcoat. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment and tossed it lightly onto the floor at Xavier's feet. "City Hall, 10:45 a.m., Lucas said coldly. "Signed, sealed, and legally binding. She is my wife, Xavier. The only thing fake in this room is your belief that you still matter." Xavier stared at the marriage certificate on the floor as if it were a venomous snake. His knees seemed to buckle slightly. He looked up at me, the arrogant, controlling smirk entirely gone, replaced by the terror of a little boy who realized he had just shattered his favorite toy. "Liv." His voice broke. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out. "Liv, baby, please. It was just a fling. I told you, they're just toys.
You're the wife.
We've been together 10 years. You belong to me. I belong to a ghost," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that only he and Lucas could hear. "I belong to the man you pretended to be. That man died a long time ago. Now look closely at my face, Xavier." He stared at me, his eyes brimming with desperate tears. "I want you to remember this face," I said softly, "because this is the last time you will ever see me look at you with anything other than absolute disgust. I won't accept it." Xavier suddenly screamed, lunging forward. He didn't make it 2 steps. Lucas moved with terrifying speed. Before Xavier could even process the motion, Lucas had closed the distance, grabbed Xavier by the throat, and slammed him backward into a marble pillar. The sound of Xavier's skull hitting the stone echoed like a gunshot. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Lucas pinned Xavier effortlessly, his forearm pressed against Xavier's windpipe, just hard enough to make the other man choke. "Listen to me very carefully. You pathetic excuse for a man," Lucas hissed, his face mere inches from Xavier's terrified eyes. "You don't get to yell at her. You don't get to say her name. If you ever breathe in her direction again, I won't just ruin your company. I will dismantle your entire life until you are begging for change on a Seattle street corner. Do you understand me?" Xavier clawed at Lucas's arm, his face turning purple. He managed a desperate, suffocated nod. Lucas released him in disgust. Xavier collapsed to the floor, coughing violently, gasping for air. "Security," Lucas called out, stepping back and straightening his cuffs. Four guards converged instantly. "Take the trash out," Lucas ordered. As the guards dragged a thrashing, sobbing Xavier out of the ballroom, the silence was absolute. Lucas turned back to me. His eyes were still dark with violence, but as he looked at me, they softened. He offered his hand again. "I believe we were dancing, Mrs. Wright." I smiled, took his hand, and the music started playing again. 2 weeks later, the fallout was biblical. When a CEO leaves his bride at the altar to sleep with an investor's daughter, it makes the gossip columns. But when that bride immediately marries the CEO's biggest rival, it makes the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Xavier's life disintegrated with the speed of a lit fuse. I sat in my new office, a sprawling glass corner suite at Wright Global Shipping, watching the stock ticker on my monitor. Xavier's company, Apex Logistics, was down 32% in 10 days. It wasn't just the scandal. Over our 10 years together, I had been the one smoothing over Xavier's aggressive, often illegal business practices. I knew which port authorities he bribed. I knew which safety regulations he ignored. I knew which shell companies he used to hide his assets. And as a wedding gift to my new husband, I had handed him the map to all of it. Lucas didn't just attack Apex in the boardroom. He systematically gutted them. He undercut their routes, poached their top executives, and leaked the safety violations to the Maritime Board. A gentle knock brought me out of my thoughts. Lucas walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking as impeccable as ever. Over the last 2 weeks, our marriage of convenience had settled into a fascinating rhythm. We lived in his sprawling penthouse. We slept in separate rooms, but we spent every evening together, drinking scotch, plotting the destruction of our mutual enemy, and, surprisingly, laughing. He handed me a cup. "Good morning, partner." "Good morning," I smiled, taking a sip. "How was the board meeting?" "Excellent." Lucas sat on the edge of my desk, crossing his ankles. "Apex just lost the Pan Pacific contract. They defaulted. Xavier's board is convening an emergency meeting this afternoon. Rumor is they're forcing him out." "And what about his darling Windsor?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Lucas let out a dark chuckle. "Oh, that's the best part. Her father, Richard, pulled his investment the moment the stock tanked. He publicly disowned Xavier. Yesterday, Windsor packed up her things and moved to Paris this morning. Apparently, she realized that being a sugar baby isn't fun when the sugar turns to salt." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. "He has nothing left." "He has one thing," Lucas said, his tone turning serious. He pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the desk to me. "He's been sitting in our lobby for 3 hours. Security asked if they should throw him out. I told them to wait." I looked at the security feed. Xavier was sitting on a couch in the ground floor lobby. He looked like a corpse. His designer suit hung off his frame, his hair was greasy, and a scruffy, unkempt beard shadowed his jaw. He was staring blankly at the floor, clutching a manila envelope. "Do you want to see him?" Lucas asked softly. "You don't have to. I can have him removed." I stared at the screen for a long time. The man who had mocked me, who had called me used goods, who had laughed with his friends while thrusting into another woman on the morning of our wedding. "Send him up," I said. 10 minutes later, the door to my office clicked open. Xavier stood in the doorway. He looked worse in person. The arrogance that had once defined his every movement was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, jittery desperation. He stepped into the office, his eyes darting around the luxurious space before landing on me. Then he looked to my right, where Lucas stood casually by the Floor-to-ceiling window, a silent, lethal guardian. Olivia, Xavier croaked. His voice was sandpaper. Make it fast, Xavier, I said, not bothering to offer him a seat. I have a meeting in 5 minutes to acquire the rest of your fleet. Xavier flinched as if I had slapped him. He clutched the manila envelope to his
chest.
I lost everything, he whispered. The board voted me out an hour ago. The bank is foreclosing on the house. Windsor left me. And you came here for what? Sympathy? Asked coldly. I came here to ask you why. Xavier's voice suddenly cracked, tears spilling over his bloodshot eyes. Why did you do this to me, Liv? I gave you 10 years. I gave you a life. You threw it all away because of one mistake? Because of one night. One night. I stood up slowly, planting my hands on the desk. Do not insult my intelligence, Xavier. It wasn't one night. It was the secretary in Chicago. It was the PR girl in Miami. It was the client in New York. You thought I was deaf and blind. You thought you had broken me down so thoroughly that I would just accept whatever scraps of affection you threw my way. I walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from him. You told Matthew I was a trained dog, I said, my voice eerily calm. You said nobody else would want me.
You thought you owned me.
But you forgot one crucial thing, Xavier. I didn't stay with you because I was trapped. I stayed because I chose to. And the moment I chose not to, you ceased to exist. Xavier fell to his knees. The sound of his kneecaps hitting the hardwood floor echoed in the quiet office. He dropped the envelope and reached for my legs, sobbing openly. Please Liv, I'll change. I swear to God I'll change. I'll sign whatever you
want.
I'll be whoever you want. Just tell him to stop. Tell him to leave me.
Something.
Please, I'm begging you, you're my wife. Do not touch her. Lucas's voice cut through the room like a whip. Xavier froze, his hands trembling inches from my skirt. He slowly lowered his head, sobbing into the floorboards. I looked down at the broken, pathetic creature crying at my feet. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a profound, cleansing relief. The heavy chain I had dragged around for a decade was finally gone. You're right about one thing, Xavier, I said softly. I did replace the groom. I stepped back, walking over to Lucas. I slipped my hand into his. Lucas instantly threaded his fingers through mine, his thumb drawing slow, calming circles on the back of my hand. And it was the best decision I ever made. I finished. Security will escort you out. If you ever come near this building or near me, again, Lucas won't. Just take your money. He will put you in prison. Goodbye, Xavier. Xavier didn't look up. He just stayed curled on the floor, weeping as too large. Security guards entered the room, hoisted him up by his armpits, and dragged him out the door. The door clicked shut. Silence descended on the office. I let out a long breath, staring at the empty space where my past had just
collapsed.
I felt a sudden warmth against my back. Lucas wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling me flush against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of my head. Are you okay? He murmured, his deep voice vibrating against my spine. I leaned back into him, closing my eyes. I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am. Lucas turned me around gently, so I was facing him. The cold, calculating CEO was
gone.
The man looking at me now had a heat in his eyes that made my breath hitch. You know, Lucas said softly, his hands resting on my hips, when you called me that night, I didn't agree to marry you just to get to Xavier's logistics network. I blinked, looking up at him. You didn't. No. Lucas smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his face.
I
agreed because 5 years ago, at a maritime gala in Boston, I watched you talk. A room full of angry dock workers out of a strike, while Xavier sat in the corner, drinking scotch. I thought to myself, that is the most brilliant, beautiful woman I have ever seen. What a tragedy, she is wasting herself on a fool. My heart skipped a beat. You've been watching me for 5 years? I've been waiting for 5 years, Lucas corrected, stepping closer until there was no space left between us. He reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Waiting for you to realize your worth. Waiting for you to walk out that door. He looked down at my lips, his gaze darkening. Our contract says this is a business arrangement, Olivia. But I don't want to do business anymore. I looked into his slate gray eyes, seeing the utter devotion and fierce protection there. He hadn't called me a toy. He hadn't called me used. He had called me brilliant. He had given me an empire. I reached up, wrapping my arms around his neck. Then let's renegotiate, I whispered. Lucas let out a low groan, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me up against him. His mouth crashed down on mine, hungry, passionate, and entirely real. There was no hesitation, no lies, no smoke and mirrors. Just a man who knew exactly what he had, and a woman who had finally found someone strong enough to hold her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city. The wedding of the century was over, but my life had just begun.